comes in second. The horse presses the early pressure. Third, sustained horse. The horse sustains its energy to the end. Comes in next, and then the late charging horse, the strike to gold, crypto clearance type of horse, comes in last. That is not the true matchup. Happily, the public mostly see it that way. Therefore, if we understand the strange attractors of the matchup, we can beat the public. What are strange attractors? That's a term in chaos physics which tells us that within a horse race, each one of these horses has a strange attraction, a strange pull on the other horses. This defies the concept that a horse is good on its own, that you can give a overall rating to how good a horse is, such as the Bayer ratings, the Ragozin ratings, you name it, power ratings. How good is a horse by itself is one thing, but how well will a horse perform within a given matchup in today's race is what we're really looking for. So we have several scenarios, several possible scenarios depending on the energy exertion, the motion, and the time of the other horses in the race. So we might get one of these other scenarios. We might have the sustained horse overcoming the leaders, and these horses coming into the early horse falling apart, and the late horse closing up later. Or we might even have a third scenario in which the late horse overcomes everybody and it wins the race, and the early horse is displaced by the early presser and it comes in second, and so on. Those are aspects of the matchup, and they are all determined by how horses run the incremental velocity in a race. Now, I use the term incremental velocity instead of pace. Why? Because pace, as defined originally by Ray Talbot, probably, the earliest writings, pace was considered how a horse ran the first part of its race, the first and second fraction to the second call. Then it was combined with final time. So second call time position was averaged with final time call position, and that was called pace. That is not pace. Pace is the entire race. The race is made up of three fractions: the first, the second, and the third. Now, if a race is set up to run early, in which the early horses have enough staying power to exert their energy throughout the race, you'll have an early horse winning the race. Here's the most important designation. How do they run by fractions? These are all three different separate races. It doesn't start here and end here. It is incremental. The first fraction, the second, and the third, and how each horse influences the other horse in the running of those fractions is what determines the outcome. If the race sets up a little differently, if it sets up where the early horses are weak and the pressers are weak, they will do very well up to this point, and then the more sustained and later horses will take over. Nice theory, you say, and correct, but how does one determine which horse will do what? Well, we'll get into that in just a moment. First, let's have a matchup questionnaire. All the things that we're talking about today, all the visuals we're showing, are in the two manuals that are contained within your kit. The Official Sartin Methodology Today workbook, the ancillary workbook, and all of these visuals are stuck into that, so if you can't see them on the screen too well, you have them in front of you as we talk. The matchup questionnaire is something that everyone should ask themselves. This is in your book, and here it is. Determined from a plus race, of which there are three designations. A plus race is when a horse ran well, but that's all defined in your workbook. A zero horse is when it did not run well, and a plus within O is when it made moves within a race or ran sufficiently fast though beaten. You can tell whether or not the early horse can win, and this is very important, because if you can find that early horses allegedly win 25% of all races, if you can find that they can't compete today, you can eliminate one or two horses right off the bat. So what you want to determine is, this horse can only win when it can go wire to wire against slower third fraction. Answer, yes or no. Now, the time, just put in the time here, you don't have to be very fancy. Time of the third fraction by which it can be beaten. Let's say every time a horse goes wire to wire, it runs at 26 at 6 furlongs, 26 third fraction. Or a 31 at 6.5 or a mile and 16th. So you find the third fraction that it's beaten by when it does not win attempting to go wire to wire. Now there's a second kind of need to lead horse that always needs to lead by the second call in order to win. So do the same thing with that. Is it a one-move horse that only does well when gaining in the stretch? In a good race, it does not run third fractions at the day's distance or surface faster than. Now put in its fastest third fraction when it wins. Do this with all forms of need to lead horse, whether they need to lead at the first fraction or need to lead by the second call. Just look for those ones in a horse's past performance and see when it wins what its third fraction might be. And when it loses, what third fraction ultimately seems